If you wanted children but the outcome could be dangerously unpredictable, what would you do? Would you chance it? Trisha Gamel wanted children, but it was a risk she wouldn't take. She believed pregnancy might endanger her life and that of her babies. Gamel and Tara Cosaert have been friends for as long as they can remember.
Growing up, we were best friends. We had each other always.
They're sisters, but the differences are easy to see.
Physically, she's the complete opposite of me.
She's very girly. I'm more tomboy.
But our personalities are pretty similar. She's a little more shy until you get to know her, and she's a little more outgoing and the wild child, and I'm more of the outwardly wild child all the time.
In addition to being sisters, Tara and Trisha are also fraternal twins. But according to Tara,
we're like salt and pepper. Fair skin, curly blonde hair, short, round, brown.
Tara and her husband Mike have 2 boys, Jake and Kyle. As for Trisha and husband Pat,
we had just gotten engaged, and we had discussed me having babies and maybe not happening the way that people have babies. And
Trisha has type 1 diabetes, a disease she shares with her father.
I was 10, and I didn't know anything about it other than my dad used to try and scare us with his needles every now and then. But I didn't really know anything about it other than I went into the hospital for a week and learned how to give syringe shots into an orange.
Trisha's father, Delmar Dean, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 16.
I don't remember anything that made me feel like I wasn't a normal person. My parents made it pretty easy to deal with it, and they knew a lot about it because of my dad, and so I was taken care of, and I learned how to take care of myself.
But when Trisha was a teenager, the motion picture Steel Magnolias gave new meaning to the disease. Her reaction to the film?
Shock, because I didn't really realize what an impact diabetes was in my life until I got to see that movie. It was disturbing. You know, I know that she had a different type of diabetes where it was really sensitive. She had a lot of problems, but I still took it. I was in high school, and I still kind of took it hard, and I think deep inside I was just angry that I had that disease, and that was the first time that diabetes actually had affected my life in a way that I didn't like.
Type 1 diabetes is a lifelong, incurable condition originating in the pancreas. When the pancreas is working properly, it produces insulin. Insulin is responsible for regulating the level of glucose or sugar in the blood. What gasoline is to a car, glucose is to the body, fuel. We need energy all the time, and glucose or sugar is our main source. So what happens with glucose? Well, glucose enters the bloodstream when the body breaks down food to use as fuel. The level of glucose in our blood is controlled mainly by the pancreas, which manufactures and releases the hormone insulin. Insulin works like a key and allows the body's cells to take glucose out of the bloodstream into the body's cells and store, or use as energy. In diabetes, 2 complications can occur. If the pancreas does not release enough insulin, the body's tissues can't fully take up glucose, and glucose levels in the bloodstream rise. When tissues are insulin resistant, the problem is compounded. They don't respond properly to insulin. Simply, the cells can't take in the glucose, causing a buildup of sugar in the bloodstream, creating devastating consequences for the diabetic. At present, there is no cure for diabetes, but there is hope. At Children's Hospital and Research Center in Oakland, California, Dr. Catherine Egley treats children diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. She describes the symptoms.
You lose weight, you get dehydrated, you start to go to the bathroom a lot. Children who didn't bedwet might start bedwetting again at night, and they'd feel very thirsty and they'd feel very hungry because their brain, even though they may be eating a lot and drinking a lot, feels as if they're being starved.
To stay alive, the diabetic becomes totally dependent on insulin, either through self-injections or an insulin pump. It is a disease requiring monitoring and management 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
There's no other treatment that works because in childhood diabetes, also known as type 1 diabetes, your pancreas has lost the ability to make insulin. So that you can't take pills, you have to take shots every day. And we're not as good as the human pancreas. Our body has many checks and balances to help us keep our blood sugar in a very narrow margin. And when you can't make insulin, you have to take it as shots. And sometimes you're overshooting and you have too much in your body, and then your blood sugar may dip really low. And sometimes you don't have enough. And so it's like a roller coaster. And those big changes and shifts of blood sugar affect our mood. They can affect how we feel, our energy levels.
But insulin injections are not a cure for diabetes. Injections are the means to manage the disease. And when a child is diagnosed with diabetes, the entire family is affected. Morgan Mari was 8 years old when she was diagnosed with diabetes. How tough is it for her?
At first it was sort of hard because I was shocked and I didn't like doing it. But then once I got the pump, it was sort of easier and I was already getting the hang of it, so.
But getting the hang of it is not as easy for parents.
It's obviously incredibly stressful for children and their families when they have the diagnosis of diabetes.
Diabetics must check the level of glucose in their blood. To do this, they do a blood test several times a day. And for parents, especially those of young children, standing by and watching their child give up those precious drops of blood is not always easy.
I think, knowing as much as I know from 20 plus years of working with kids and families with diabetes, this is huge. It's life-changing, and it's not going away. Right now, unfortunately, I know that as I talk to them and counsel them, this is something they're going to be living with day to day, at least for the indefinite future.
And helping them through that indefinite future, Children's Hospital has a dedicated team of specialists, including clinical social worker Kathy Porgy.
We're unique in that we have a program to help families and children who are newly diagnosed with diabetes, and then we follow those children in our clinic. We really work as a team to put together education and training for families so that they can better manage their child medically but also psychosocially.
But always, diabetes is about control.
The thing about having diabetes is that the word control is a psychosocially loaded word for them. It means controlling of blood sugars, it means controlling environment, it means losing control when everybody is telling you what to do and how to do it.
And each age group faces different challenges.
Living with diabetes day to day, that it gets old, it is high burnout.
Many teens rebel against diabetes. It's a time when the balance between parental supervision and developing independence is dangerously at risk.
The most challenging for my adolescent population is maintaining an acceptable blood glucose control and still meeting the challenges of being a teenager.
Max Jackson was 7 years old when he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Now, at 15, he feels that until there's a cure, diabetes will continue to control his life.
Diabetes is present in almost everything that I do because you always have to control yourself all the time, and kind of, like maybe you forget about it for a little bit, but it really is like every time you eat, every time you have to do almost anything different, you have to think of diabetes and make sure you know what you're doing.
Make no mistake, type 1 diabetes is a potentially deadly condition, requiring invasive and visible tools such as pumps, needles, blood glucose meters, syringes, test strips, and of course, insulin. And some teens stop taking their insulin to prove they're just like other kids.
If they go on long enough and don't have any insulin, their body starts to just basically break down. They break down fat for energy because they can't use sugar anymore. And when that happens, they build up ketones, which are acid. So it's like pouring battery acid in your blood. The acid level builds up to the point where you can't compensate anymore, you become dehydrated, you start to throw up, you may go into a coma and shock, and you can die. And that can happen within a matter of a few days if you stop taking your shots. So it's not very forgiving.
And because it's not very forgiving, Trisha questioned the risks of carrying a child. What impact would diabetes have on her pregnancy, her health, and the health of her baby? At Kaiser Permanente in Panorama City, California, Trisha discussed her concerns with her gynecologist, Dr. Arthur Flesher.
The main risk to the mother is the worsening of her diabetes, probably an increased incidence of preeclampsia or high blood pressure and complications at the end of pregnancy.
And the risk to the baby?
The baby makes lots of insulin, which is probably related to growth hormone as far as the baby's concerned. The babies grow huge with huge shoulders, and as soon as you cut the umbilical cord, the baby has all this insulin it's making, and the blood sugar all of a sudden stops. And so as soon as they're born, they can have problems related to blood sugar.
The majority of women with type 1 diabetes have normal pregnancies and deliver healthy babies. But becoming pregnant scared Trisha. She told future husband Pat Gamel of her fears.
I wanted him to know that it might not be possible to have children with my diabetes, and so we talked about every different aspect of that and decided that having a tubal was the best option. It wasn't that I can't have kids, it's that I didn't want to risk having a kid with my diabetes and the effects that it would have on a baby or myself. You know, if I were to get pregnant, there'd be a lot more responsibilities that could have been taken care of before that.
My take on it was easy from my perspective. It was, I love Trisha. It was a no-brainer. I mean, I'd rather have a wife than a child. And it wasn't so much of what we thought would happen, or at least what I thought would happen to a child. It was what would happen to Trisha if she had a child.
Eventually, Trisha decided to have a tubal ligation, a procedure where the fallopian tubes are closed to prevent the egg from traveling from the ovary to the uterus.
I had some personal issues with that. I was a little sad that, it would never happen to me, but it was easy for me because it would keep me as healthy as possible for the rest of my life. And that's what I care about. I don't want to have children and suffer the consequences of going through childbirth and pregnancy and not be able to take care of my child. And that was the biggest concern for me, and that's why I did what I did, because I didn't want to rely on other people to help me help my baby.
Ultimately, Trisha did need to rely on other people, and she needed one person in particular.
Was always asked, does your sister have kids? And I said no, but when she wants them, I'll carry them. And it was never a big deal. It was just something that I knew that was going to come. Well, I never thought it was going to come. I didn't think it was going to happen. If you have kids, it's a whole other life you live, a whole other path it directs you on. So for two people that really want kids, I think it's the best.
And that'll make good parents. They'll be good parents.
Will.
This would be a new adventure for the sisters, and in Tara's words,
anytime we adventure on something new, we had each other, so we took it on better than just one person could.
Once again, they took it on together. But in this adventure, there were others to consider. Tara's sons, Jake and Kyle, and Mike, Tara's husband.
I knew Tara's take on it and that what Tara would be doing. But I was really sold on the fact after I heard Mike's reaction, which was...
Well, if I couldn't have kids, I wish that someone would help us out in that area. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest reason why I would want to do it.
After Pat and Trisha were married, Trisha began checking out her options.
I started doing research, and it is possible to take your eggs out and fertilize them and implant them into somebody else.
I've never had this happen in my practice where we've had twins where one is a gestational surrogate for another twin.
Dr. Brian Acasio is the medical director of Acasio Fertility in Laguna Niguel, California.
Let me be clear on this from the beginning. They had a pretty good idea of what they wanted to do. They're pretty motivated.
It was 5 years that I knew for sure that I was going to do it.
And we didn't talk about that much. When it came down to it, it was like, well, here we go.
Tara and I started off with birth control pills to get our cycles in sync. And so we did that for the first month and a half until we were in sync.
Trisha, the biological mother and egg donor, undergoes stimulation of her ovaries with daily medication. And Tara, the gestational surrogate, takes injections twice a week to stimulate her uterus. When Trisha's follicles are mature, the eggs are ready to be harvested. As for Tara,
a couple of blood tests to make sure that she's in a what we call therapeutic or normal range, doing an ultrasound to absolutely guarantee that the uterine lining, which is where the implantation of the embryos occurs, is receptive to the embryos, and implantation is optimized by those two pieces of information. Once she's there, we maintain her at a steady state. Then the difference is when Trisha is ready. When Trisha's eggs or follicles are mature enough and the eggs are ready to be harvested, she takes a special injection exactly 36 hours before we do an egg retrieval.
To retrieve the eggs, a special vacuum line is attached to a needle. The needle is then inserted into Trisha's left ovary. The follicular fluid is drained from the ovary, passes through a sterilized tube, and the embryologist retrieves the tube through a window, bringing it into a specialized in vitro fertilization lab.
The embryologist then looks at the fluid under a special inverted microscope and sees the egg microscopically, lets us know that they got the egg, and we move on to the next follicle. So we do this for as many follicles are on one side, and then we remove the needle, and then we go to the other side. So one stab into each ovary, generally per side, is all that's required.
The sperm is collected from the father and is placed in a water bath for 4 to 6 hours.
As most women know, men are a little slow to come around to things, and the sperm is basically the same way. It takes about 4 to 6 hours before we actually fertilize the eggs that we've harvested that day.
14 to 16 hours later, the embryos are observed in a petri dish, and their growth is then monitored over 3 days.
Meanwhile, Trish and Pat are done. She's given her eggs. The process is complete for her. Tara has just begun, really, even though she's been on some mild medications to stimulate the uterus.
Now, Tara begins a series of daily progesterone injections. The injections help maintain the endometrium, or the uterine lining, which in turn will sustain the hospitality of the uterus. On day 3, the embryos will be transferred to the uterus.
And the embryo transfer took place February 15th?
Yes.
Yeah. And all 4 of us in there getting pregnant. Just things that you just never knew could be possible is possible, and that was neat. It was like like an inserted tube, and we watched it all on the ultrasound.
Ultrasound it, so
and
you can see the catheter. They do one at a time, and
you see them putting them way back in there, setting them back in there.
It was weird. It was like, I'm just like, oh, don't drop the eggs. Oh, those are my babies.
Well, for a week after, I couldn't do anything but go to the bathroom. So I stayed at my mom's house.
Yeah, that was really nice. She had her hooked up with everything. Cooked for her, cleaned all her area, just kept her all just a little princess. And it was nice. My mother did a great job with keeping those babies in.
Yeah. I think the happiest part about this whole thing is when we found out that we were pregnant, because...
And twins.
And
a boy and a girl.
Yeah.
I don't think it gets any better than that, so...
I really didn't want to do it again, but I would have.
They were so excited that they just called us as soon as they found out, and we just sat there and just overwhelmed with happiness and fear, and now this is it. We're pregnant, and we got to stay pregnant, and that was the next step. It was exciting, but it was also scary because things happen, and I was just happy. She had 2 winter babies, or they were born in spring, but she had winter pregnancies, and she wanted to float in the pool with a big old belly, and so we actually had talked to the doctor and figured out what's the time frame before we actually get pregnant, and we did it from there, and it was perfect.
Not quite.
I don't think any of us knew how intense and everything was going to be, and how much, really, if we knew going into it how much Tara had to go through, I mean, this might have been a little different, thought out differently.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they do it, if they do it on purpose so that, they don't scare everybody away from doing it, or if they just don't tell you everything that's going to happen. And we initially had thought Tara's scared just horrible of needles. She just can't stand a needle.
She had to get muscle shots.
She had to go through, so we sat down at our initial consultation with the Casio, and really we found out the most painful part of this whole thing was when they took the eggs out of Trisha. So we thought, okay, well, at least, we both talked about it, at least the pain goes on Trisha's side, not Tara's side, was kind of what.
Yeah, I was thankful for that, but I was waiting for my pain to come as her hips were given out, because she had to take shots in her muscles.
When it was time to start, they gave Trisha one shot, and Tara had to take them like daily in her hips. She's afraid of needles. We didn't know that. So, all these things, and it was just the next, and she's already under hormones and emotional, and I think after even, they might have taken you off of some of the hormones, and Tara had to stay on some of the hormones and other stuff they put her on, and she's still taking these shots. And that was the miserable time, I think, for, the most miserable for all of us, and Tara, and was just, gosh, what else has she got to go through now? We had no clue, and she didn't think, hey, they lied to me on this thing. None of us knew, but you always hoped in the back of your head Tara knew that you weren't hiding something from her too, because it was, oh, sorry, and we go to, consultation, come back, and guess what? You got to do this type of shot now. You're like, oh, God.
I was getting sicker, and once I got pregnant, it was double the hormones, because they were twins, and plus I was still getting injections. So I was pretty much throwing up day and night, and wasn't myself because I was still on steroids, and it was pretty dark. Those were dark months.
Dark months that got darker. Tara was taking 3 types of hormones, plus the steroid. The drugs were taking their toll, and without telling anyone, Tara stopped taking the drugs.
To me, it felt like, why keep doing this to myself? It was like a matter of life or death to me. That's what it felt like. Whenever Trisha took the boys, said I wanted to get in the car and get hit by somebody else. And those were the thoughts that I was having. That's not normal, so.
I had to call Pat and say, really, seriously, she's really sick. Because, it starts going around the family like, well, is she really sick, or is, but, obviously, we're not getting paid for this. We don't want to be paid for it. I was doing it as a favor to Pat and Trisha, and I just want to make that point clear. And Trisha was fine, but Pat, being an outsider more so than even Trisha, I had to call him and explain that to him and say, look, I'm telling you, she's, I can hear her in the night in the shower, 3 times a day probably on average for the first 4 months.
As for Trisha,
because I know she hates being pregnant. But not only that, it just has to be so emotionally draining for her. And she threw up for 4 months, and that was so sad. But she stuck it out. She's a great person, and I just don't know how somebody could do that for somebody else. I saw what she went through in the beginning, and that's hard. That's real sisterly love.
I don't know how I'm looking on the outside. I just know how I feel. I know like Mike was asking how I feel about the babies. I think it's a great thing, and I wouldn't change it, and I would do it again. If it didn't work out, I wouldn't do it again after this. This is like a done deal. But they saw me get sick, and they're just now like a part of my life. So everything that I go through, whether I say it or they take it to heart, and I feel bad about that. I don't want them to feel guilty about anything, because it's just what it is. I don't like to complain or do any of that, but
I can't wait for them just to be here and stop bugging my sister. She called me the other night and asked me if I could come pick them up so she could sleep. I said, I'm sorry I can't, but I can pick up yours.
California state law requires a legal and binding contract when surrogacy is involved. Before the babies were born, the Gamels and Cosaerts found themselves in court, a sobering event for both couples.
We found out after we got through the contract phase, and Mike and Tara had to sign off that they had no rights to the children after they were born.
And they cover everything from if I were in a car accident in a coma, they'd have to keep me alive to have a baby, which is fine. It's just strange to see it on paper, to sign off on it.
It was things that new parents just don't have to think about, and that was weird. That was a little. I just thought, I don't want to answer these questions, but we had to. It's the law. We had to do it.
Until that judge said, okay, it's sealed and done. You have no rights to these babies anymore. I was like, wow, you know what, we did. Up until that point, it was I didn't really give it much thought, but when we were sitting in the courtroom, like, wow, these really were our kids until we just gave them up. I never really thought about it like that, but until you were in that courtroom and you heard him say, okay, you lost all rights.
On August 22, 2004, the twins celebrated the upcoming birth with a baby shower. With friends and family gathered, both mothers rejoiced in the labor of love that began as a result of Trisha's diabetes. But diabetes had taken its toll on Tara and Trisha's father. 2 days after the baby shower, on August 24th, he died.
My father was diagnosed with diabetes at 17, and he had lived a good life, and he was strong, and he wanted to do things, and the older he got, the less that he could do, and towards the end, his body was pretty much shutting down. He had neuropathy of the nerves, and his body was rejecting food and water, and so he decided to go out his way and took his life when I was 30 weeks pregnant. The babies. And he was a big supporter of it all. And I remember I was complaining to him, I'm sick all the time. And so he came over and he had bought a little glass swan with flowers in it and a card. And just said, I'm so proud of all you kids. But you deserve to be the #1 kid this year. Because what you're doing is wonderful.
It's the worst feeling to be happy about something and so completely sad about something. Having to go through what should be the happiest time for me and becoming the saddest thing that has ever happened in my life was hard. It was confusing, and I kind of just became a robot, and I quit my job. I took care of her boys because she went into labor, or she had contractions, and they did a test and everything was fine. Her water wasn't gonna break for at least 2 weeks, so we were okay that way. But it was a stressful, sad, horrible time for us, and I just quit my job, took care of the boys, and took care of her, and we got through it. About 4 more weeks.
Almost 35 weeks into the pregnancy, the sisters were racing scooters in Tara's neighborhood.
Well, we were together all the time.
Yeah.
And she would help me pick up the boys from school, and her mother-in-law gave me a sit-down scooter with a basket and everything, and I loved it. I just was big old belly and riding around, and so I would ride that, and she would ride the GoPed scooter, standing up
Stand-up scooter.
So in the middle of the street all the way to the school, we would race.
But she's actually here.
I'm going and
Her
she's
legs are spread as wide as they could because her belly was so big. It was hilarious.
short and fat, and she's tall and lean, and we're racing. And
the
everybody's
perfect 10.
looking at us like, "What's do it?"
We made the perfect 10 going down the street. That was fun.
That was fun.
It rocked the babies out. So she called me at like 7:30 that night after our scooter race and said she had lost her mucus plug. And that's just like the cork saying, okay, we're ready to breathe. And so she said, so be prepared. So Pat and I were painting the bedroom, and we're at 34 weeks and like 5 days. So basically 35 weeks pregnant. So we were pretty much in the clear to to give birth.
I went to bed and put towels down, and I knew it was gonna happen.
So about 4:30 or so.
It was about 4:15, and I rolled over and trickle, and I'm like, Mike, my water broke. He jumps in bed. I get my wife back. That was the first thing he said. And then the boys, they both said, I get mommy back. So everyone was all happy.
Because of Tara's small frame, the doctors decided the safest delivery would be by cesarean. And when Pat and Trisha arrived at the hospital, they found Tara restrained on the operating table.
It was freaky to see her that way, and I was really nervous because she was having major surgery for me. She'd gone through this whole thing, and now they're cutting her open, and it was nerve-wracking for me. I didn't want anything to happen to her, and just when I walked in there, I'm like, why do they have you strapped down like that? It was like she was gonna jerk or something while they're taking the babies out. She's just like spread out and like, ugh. And they'd already got her, cut open, and so I just grabbed her hand, and she would squeeze my hand at times that they were pulling. I'm like, can you feel that? And I kept asking her, did you feel that? And she's like, no. I'm like, oh God, stop squeezing my hand when you do that. It makes me freak out.
Her face was like, oh God, and that's all I can look at is her face, and she's like, Tara, can you feel any of that? Like, no, but you feel the pressure, and I feel the pressure, and I know what they're doing, so it gives me the willies anyway. So I squeeze her hand, and she's like, can you feel that?
It was creepy. It was creepy, but watching them when they finally cut through, she just had so much fluid coming, the water just coming out of her, and Madison came out, and I'm just like, oh my God, and then they took her, and I'm just like, oh, there's another one, and then there's Tara, oh my God. And so then they pull Max out, and Max grabs onto the suction hose, and he's like white gripping it, man, or white knuckling it. He would not let go of that. The doctors pried his hands off. He's like, I don't want out yet.
And we found out that he was the kicker.
Yeah, he was.
We blamed it on Madison.
Call him the kicking chicken, because he kicked all the time.
Always present is the threat of diabetes. As Trisha and Pat's babies grow, they'll be monitored for the disease. While there is no agreed-upon cause for type 1 diabetes, experts believe numerous factors can contribute to a child developing the condition. Statistics indicate that 80 to 85% of new cases do not show a family history of type 1 diabetes. But Dr. Egley cautions.
When we know that there's a family history, that ups the odds for other family members. If you have diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and you're planning to have children, there's a risk for your children as well.
Because of Trisha's family history of diabetes, she and Pat decided to do all they could to safeguard the health of their children, including preserving the cord blood of both babies. Dr. Bertram Lubin is the president of the Children's Hospital Oakland Research Institute. He explains that
cord blood stem cells are the stem cells that can be isolated from blood that remains in the placenta after a baby's born.
Scientists are looking at ways to create islet beta cells from stem cells that can then be safely transplanted into diabetics. But Lubin is cautious about the use of cord blood stem cells as a cure for diabetes.
The theory is that maybe there's a way to take a small population of the blood in cord blood and differentiate it into an islet cell that can make insulin and perhaps be used for treatment of children or adults with diabetes. Nobody has done that yet. But there's a hope that in the future that potential might exist. We may be 15 to 20 years from an effective way to see if we can isolate a stem cell from cord blood that can be made into a pancreatic cell. And during that period of time, there may be even better therapies that come along.
I think every day we all pray and hope that we're going to see the day when we don't have to tell another child or family, your child has diabetes. And I think in my lifetime we will have that day.
Before Tara gave birth to Madison and Max, she and Mike talked about her attachment to the unborn babies.
It's different when you know that I can't bring myself to have such a strong bond with them, because I know that when they're born, they're not mine. So it's been said in my head that they're not mine, so I do carry them like a host. I don't carry them motherly, I guess, but I didn't with mine either. For me, it's after. But
I think she's going to suffer from that.
yeah, he does. I don't know. I'm sure there'll be some sort of small depression, because I'll have all these hormones and I'll just have to buy more hermit crabs.
I just know how she is with our boys, and I know that when she sees the babies, especially one being a girl that we never had, I think she's going to have issues with that. And I've said that from day one. But Trisha lives, 3 miles from us, so it's not going to be a big issue. I just think that, it's going to be more than she thinks it is. That's all. I hope it's not a big issue, but I think it's even more than what she thinks it will be.
But it was a big issue. It was a huge issue.
Enjoy the lightness of my body. I'm gonna enjoy seeing my kids and try to keep them off of me.
I had in my mind that I was just gonna go home and I did my deed and I can get on with my life, but it just didn't go that way, and I never felt that they were mine. I never had those feelings of they should be with me. It was more, I think, natural hormones or something that just wasn't right. I needed to be with them, to heal. It was hard. It was like the second saddest day was coming home empty-handed, and I saw Jake and Kyle. I'm like, oh, you think they'll fit in diapers? I just wanted to hold them. it was one of those things where I just needed to do that. I just needed to do that. So I'm like, I kept saying to Michael, well, let's go see the babies. He's like, we just got home. What about you saying you're going to shove them away and you're done? I'm like, oh, let's just go see him. And he just kept joking, and he'd leave and I start crying. And it's like, oh, what's wrong with me? So then we went to bed. We woke up. It was 8 o'clock. And he says, I go, let's go see the babies. He goes, Tara. I'm like, Mike, don't say it anymore. I cry every time. He's like, oh, okay, let's go. So we got here, and those little babies, I just sat down and just laid them both on me, and we just all three slept. And it was just, I guess it's like a healing process, and I just needed that. And I was here every day and taking care or helping, and after about 2 months, my boys, Jake comes around the corner and says, Mommy, you love these babies more than us. And then Kyle came around the corner and says, you want these babies to be yours and not us anymore, huh? And I said, Trisha, we're gonna go. So they snapped me right out of it, and now I came over when they were in school or they were doing their own thing, and I came on my time, and it's been hard to draw that line. I had guilty feelings. It's just so different. Sometimes I think, oh, why am I acting like this? And then I'm like, well, you just had babies, and it's a normal feeling. I just don't have those babies with me.
I felt guilty that, she went through all that, and during the pregnancy, I felt guilty that she was at the end going to have to give those babies to me. There was no part of me that was thinking, well, you can just have one, because that would never happen.
That's why I wanted her to look like me.
But it was just, you know, it was hard for me to see her go through pains and sadness, and the guilt even got worse after my dad died, because now she has to mourn our dad and carry my babies at the same time, so she has to be even more of a trooper to keep them in and keep them healthy. And so it was hard, you know. It was harder for her, but for me it was emotionally hard, you know. And after she gave them to me, it was even harder, because then the guilt is
you can come over.
You know, the babies are a few days old, and we're trucking over to Aunt Mama's house, picking up Aunt Mama so she could spend time with them. And I wanted to do that, you know. It was something I wanted to do, and, you know, and she needed it. And so it was, I think she likes me now. She doesn't pinch me anymore as often.
We got into some gnarly pool fights.
Yeah, we had some pool wrestling moments.
Tara and Trisha were both asked if they ever felt Tara was intruding on the new parents.
No.
I did feel that way.
No, never.
I kept thinking, well, you go through so many. What are they thinking? What am I thinking? What are those babies thinking? What?
Oh, I thought the same thing, you know. Am I not going over there enough? You know, is she feeling, you know, like she isn't welcome here? Because I wanted to make sure she was welcome, you know, when she came, and whenever she came over, she was welcome. So, and you just have that in your own mind. You don't know what the other's thinking, and, you know, that's where communication comes in. But it's hard to communicate those types of feelings, and, you know.
Because then you would really have to talk to her. And we just don't do that.
Just because you carried my babies.
I still find that I'm trying to find my niche. Where was I before? And you just don't go back. I realized you just don't go back to where it was. It's just a different path.
For me, it's kind of sad and great feeling to see on TV somebody struggling and, you know, doing that. But I want my own baby, and I can't carry, and I was there. I was there a year ago, 2 years ago, and I have 2 babies of my own, and it's all because of her. And my husband had something to do with it. We had nothing but a happy ending with the babies. You know, they were the best part of the whole thing.
So perfectly.
Other than our dad dying, it was just the perfect.
The doctors were so good. Our families, they were wonderful. Everybody just pitched in. I got my little scooter. I had a nanny. I had a cook. That was another thing that I had withdrawals with.
Yeah, she
was at my beck and call. And
I was
everybody
her maid,
just
her cook, her
people
nanny.
just would talk so wonderful of me, and they would just be like, "You are the greatest person in the world." And in the end, I was fat with no babies
and a dirty
and nobody was cleaning my house or cooking for me or taking care of my little kids. It was horrible.
I know. I had guilt over that. I'm like, poor Tara. Nobody's waiting on her anymore. That's got to be hard.
Yeah, instead of people...
Nobody's saying, "Oh, how great are you?" They're asking her, "Are you still pregnant?"
What happened?
She would get mad.
Look at your sister just had twins, and look at her. Jeez.
Sit-ups. Try them.
Today, Max and Madison are thriving children, constantly on the move, as Pat and Trisha try to keep one step ahead of them. Trisha tests her children regularly for type 1 diabetes. There's no indication either child has the disease. Tara has found her niche and is happy in her role as Aunt Mama to the twins. As for Trisha, some nights are sleepless because of neuropathy, a result of the disease. She worries about her future. But she also believes a cure for type 1 diabetes will be found. In the meantime, she and Pat celebrate the labor of love that brought Max and Madison into their world.